So, one of the things that I have come to understand over time is that once you have a lot of power over other people, you should actually seek to use it as minimally as possible. And the reason why is because when you overuse that power, you destroy other people. You destroy them as themselves. Even if you're right, you can end up destroying another person. And that's why I think it's very interesting. You see in a lot of older educational traditions, usually like a spiritual or religious tradition, where a lot of the education is actually through these kind of riddles. So in Christianity, it's going to be parables. In Buddhism, they have something called koans, Koans. And in fact, I've read many stories of Buddhist monks that instead of answering like an adherence question, they'll just give them a riddle or ask a question in return or say something just that seems completely unrelated. And then they get sent to do more manual labor. And the process itself seems like, how is this education? What are we doing here? Or the stories of Jesus where he's given like parable after parable and it's like, okay, Bible Jesus, why would you not just give the information? And I'll tell you why you don't just give the information. One, because people will steal it and present it as their own, as we are seeing rampantly in internet culture. But two, because if you are in a position of power and authority or of greater knowledge or greater debate ability, you can logic someone into submission. And so they are not taking the concept inside themselves, kind of working with it and coming to a conclusion on their own. You're forcing it upon them, and you are coming against who they are as a person. The more power you have, the more you want to plant seeds that can grow within the person as they move throughout their life. Ideally, we don't want to change people. We want to give people tools where they can change themselves. So, for example, as a parent, obviously there are places where you need to have, absolute power, control, and authority over a child. For example, in terms of their safety, right? Like, you don't get to play in the street until you understand how cars work, right? So, there are going to be places where there's a firm no, a firm exercise of power and authority. But otherwise, you're going to allow your child to make decisions for themselves and you're not going to micromanage them. For example, how they play with their Legos or their dolls, right? Like we're not going to come in and fix it for them. Interestingly, this is a huge reason why a lot of people have gotten very into video games because parents aren't necessarily learning about Roblox. And so they're not coming in to tell a child how to play. They're not criticizing their play style, and the child gets that sense of like autonomy and authority over themselves in an area where it's safe to kind of explore. So if you are dealing with a person who putting themselves above you as a teacher or putting themselves in a position of power over you and then is saying, and now you have to do what I'm saying you have to do. That is a person who's misusing their power and authority. Really, when we're looking at healthy examples of power and authority, we're looking at examples that allow people to make decisions for themselves. Really, what it's doing is allowing someone to shift their identity and way of thinking incrementally. So that's actually one thing I loved about the subreddit, which is that, I was presenting information from multiple different people, different perspectives, different pieces of information. And so an individual victim of abuse could come and read that information, and some of it doesn't apply, some of it does, but they themselves sort of bring it into their own understanding and awareness and process it and then apply it in their lives. Whereas, and I've mentioned this in other videos, some people are attracted to sort of a guru dynamic where you have a guru that you pay and you have their course and their program and you read their materials and you put them on a pedestal and allow that person to like tell you what to do. Whereas I think it makes a lot more sense, particularly for victims of abuse, to say, hey, this is what's safe and what isn't safe. These are the options that you could use. Here's what other people have done. And as I said in other videos, not anything is going to be a hard and fast rule, because if there are children involved, then letting the abuse victim have autonomy and authority may not necessarily be the right, way to go. But in general, we're trying to allow people to have as much autonomy and authority as they can have without it being dangerous to themselves or others. So I like that process where a victim themselves can read information and process it and shift their own understanding and therefore their own identity. Also, the same thing sort of here with the videos on YouTube. I'm essentially having conversations about things and thoughts that I have, but like in no way, shape, or form am I going to come to somebody and say, this is what you should do. I definitely prefer a diagnostic approach versus a telling someone what to do approach. And also because there are so many different factors that go into that depending on where you live and what you're dealing with. If you need that kind of insight, you're definitely going to want to go to somebody who's more local to you. So that idea of shifting the identity and helping someone inculcate self-awareness is what these sort of more general approaches allow. Any good teacher is honestly going to make you think like you're the smartest person in the world. You might not even recognize they're a great teacher because you're having all of these insights and they're supporting you in that. And you think, wow, I've had this insight and this insight and this insight, and they're supporting you in that. And you may not have recognized that they had planted those seeds, but maybe in a different way. I know for me, one way I often will plant a seed is by explaining something that I realized for myself and that I did in my situation and what I was thinking in my thought process. And then the other person may go, oh, I recognize this and I could apply this too. So instead of me telling them this is what you should do, here's where you're wrong, it's a mirroring that allows them to see themselves, but through their own process of autonomy and identity. And the reason why this is so important is because that is how we respect people. We don't want to power over people, even if they're wrong. I mean, unless they're harming someone. Allowing someone to come to their own understanding of reality is precisely the opposite of what the abuse dynamic is. A person puts himself in a position of power and control over another person, decides to judge them, punish them, criticize them, tell them they're wrong, destabilize them from reality and from themselves and their own emotions and thoughts and feelings, and replace it with themselves. The abuser doesn't want there to be two individual people. They want to see themselves patterned, like Agent Smith in The Matrix, It's me, and then everything else is me, the way that I think it should be. That is an extremely toxic way of thinking that you should be in the world, because then that is not a world, that is just you everywhere you look. It's extraordinarily selfish, and it is also ineffective use of power, because the reality is that somebody else is their own person. You can push it for a long time, but at some point, there are cracks in that foundation because reality is still real, as my friend Faith Worley says. It's still behind the scenes, still chugging along. So as much as they want to make the world how they think it should be, or make the world a reflection of themselves, that's not the reality of how this world works. Anyway, I hope this makes sense, and I'll talk to you next time.